8th of June 1946. The electricity never did get fixed. Amid arriving guests that were, instead, welcomed ad hoc, Thomas Barrow carried his wife across the lawn and the yard, ignoring the gathering entourage that he was collecting. He nodded to Andy, who had seen the Downton butler advancing, and he held open the door of the servants' entrance. Milo was no bird, and Thomas carried her as if he were carrying a bag of feathers and did not stop as he strode along the passageway and headed up the stairs, stopping only when he reached without his own bedroom door, prepared to ignore Anna if she complained that she was being taken into the men's area. No one spoke, however, but many gathered at the door as Thomas laid Milo into his own bed. She looked tiny to his eyes, like the child she had once been, her only friend, and she his. Milo was shivering, and she realized the clothes she was wearing were damp. "Thank you, everybody," Thomas said, in as dignified a manner as he could, to the people at the doorway. "Master George needs today's party to continue," but George Crawley stepped past them all, and raised a hand. "Thomas, stay with her," Master George told him, and Thomas did not know whether he was more shocked at his lordship asking him to renege his duties today, or that he had used his Christian name, Andrew, and at this, Andy pulled himself upright, waiting for instructions. "Have Mr. Barrow brief you on the day," and as George Crawley anticipated Thomas's protests, held up a hand and crossed the bedroom floor. "You have no need to compromise yourself today, Mr. Barrow," he soothed. "My friends and I, and the rest of the staff will manage without you, though of course, your management would make it all the easier." And the current Lord Grantham looked across to Milo. "She needs you, tell me," he added, "tell me what you should need." "I need Miss Sibby," Thomas told him, his medical training of long ago rising up like a ferocious beast of another time, long dormant in his mind. Two people were needed. Miss Sibby, like her mother, was cool and calm under pressure, and Thomas needed that, in case he himself lost it. "Master George," Thomas called, as George Crawley made it to the door. "Please, Ernest, can you?" "He can be beside me today," George Crawley called back. "My star scholar, at university aged 13. Thomas gave his lordship a desperate smile and looked back to Milo, who had closed her eyes. "No," Thomas told her, as the door closed behind him. "You can sleep later. Got to get you out of these damp things but words faded to nothing when Milo made to get up, and stumbled on the bare planks of Thomas's bedroom. As he helped her up, he glimpsed her legs, skin and bone, feet distorted of shape, dark patches of bruising on her thighs, and grew angry at Blackett for letting her out of his sight looking like this, before reminding himself that Blackett had written long before now, and that Milo Ashby, his wife, once vivacious and bright and determined in life, was now standing before him like a ghost, like a corpse stuck back up and clinging to life. "The now," he soothed to Milo, as she reached out a thin, bony arm towards Thomas to support her. "You're safe now. You're with me, and you're safe." 88,888,888 No. "I absolutely forbid it." Tom Branson raised a finger and wagged it at his daughter. "This is your cousin's party, and I forbid you to leave and do your nursing." He said the last word as if it was a bad taste that he needed to spit from his lips. "The war is over. You've given that up now, or so you said." "Father," Sibby Branson told him patiently, "it is for Cousin George that I do this. He has asked specifically. So I can hardly say no, can I?" Tom turned his head, his eyes fixing on the current Lord Grantham, wondering which of his Air Force comrades he wanted Sibby to demean herself to tend. "Him with the moustache?" Tom glanced across the lawn, at a young, fair-headed fellow. "Him?" Begot. He had met him before, at other parties, and did not like him one bit. "No, none of these people," Sibby told her father, gesturing towards the house. "Cousin George told me it was a person that Thomas Barrow has specifically asked me to treat. She is in a very bad way, so I am given to understand." Then Sibby turned and was off, before Tom Branson could stop her, his mind racing, fixating on the word, she. And then he strode towards Mary Talbot, who was braving the summer's day with Henry not far from her in a wheelchair, sitting beside him and holding his hand. "Sister Mary," Tom asked, hurrying over to her, "Master George has asked that Sibby nurse someone at the house. Do you know who that might be?" Lady Mary gave a quick glance towards her husband, who seemed to have closed his eyes in the growing sunlight and brightness of the day, and then up towards the first floor of Downton Abbey. "No," she told Tom. "I do not know, but I will ask him." And she got up, quickly, and Tom took her place beside Henry Talbot, his business partner and recovering prisoner of war, and sensed sadly that the man had not even noticed that he and his wife had changed places. Lady Mary came back a few moments later, and Tom Branson got to his feet. "Well?" he asked, seeing a strange look cross her face. "It's Milo," she told him, "Milo Ashby." And then she smiled, and gave a small laugh, her humor matching the bright and brilliant sun hanging over them all. "She came back, Tom," Mary told him. "She came home." 88,888,888 Sibby and Thomas managed to get Milo to the bathroom and, as Thomas ran a hot bath for his wife, Sibby Branson peeled the wet things from her body. Milo managed, but did not protest as the two medics lifted her into the bath, Thomas supporting her because, if he did not, she would surely sink. So little energy Milo seemed to have. "You know you are back at Downton Abbey?" he asked. "Downton," Milo repeated. But he could ask no more, as Sibby sponged down what she thought was dirt all over her skin but found she could not remove them. She shook her head to Thomas, and he held her longer as Sibby got a towel. Together they dried her and Sibby brought clothes from those destined for the poor. "I have a dress," Milo managed. Lady Sybil's. "You do," Thomas agreed, and with presence of mind told Sibby to go to the under-housekeeper's room, which was Ernest's room now, and she would find the dress there. Ernest's room, Milo repeated, as Thomas clung to her emaciated frame, and seemed to hold her for an age before Sibby returned. The dress swamped Milo, and Thomas had to hold back the tears. It was the dress in which Milo, as a 16-year-old prodigy, in a bid to escape the wardship that came with her estate and money being under 16, had married Thomas Barrow, in a registry office in Edinburgh. Then, Thomas believed it was nothing, a gesture of goodwill to a friend, and that marrying Melusina, with Matthew and Mrs. Crawley as witnesses, would have no bearing on his life. How wrong he had been. The dress swamped Milo. She was like a young child doing dress-up, and it was Miss Sibby who suggested they carry her back to Thomas's room. "She'll sleep now, and you should ask Daisy for chicken broth," Sibby told Thomas, as she closed the door behind Milo for a moment and spoke to Thomas in the corridor. "Please, will you ask her?" Thomas told Sibby. "I do not wish to. I cannot leave her." So unlike Aunt Mary and Uncle Henry, Sibby thought, then nodded towards the door. "It may do her no good. I'll get Cousin George to ask Dr. Connell to come." She took a few steps to Thomas and lowered her voice. "Malnutrition, abuse of some sort. Her ribs seem to have mended untidily, and she has no muscle tone, no skin quality. She's lost some of her hair at the crown." Thomas nodded. He has seen all of those things too. Food would help, food and rest and strengthening exercises like Henry Talbot, and he suspected that he knew who the intruder was in the cottage. No intruder at all, but the rightful owner. But, Thomas knew something that Sibby did not know. Milo had been in Nazi Germany for the duration of the war, undertaking work involving uranium and radiative material such as this caused damage to the body. She only knew what she had done throughout the war, but Thomas's guess was that kindness was not shown to her. If it were a dangerous job, would Heisenberg have intervened? The man had been determined to do something with uranium, so Chadwick and George Paget Thompson had told him. Would he have been single-minded enough to use Milo to that end? Of course. Would she have done it for her love of him? Yes. Thomas had no experience of what radiation sickness was. Scant reports had come in from Japan, and Thomas was familiar with the demise of Madame Curie. Would hot food, rest and exercise be the making of Milo? Would she recover? Only time would tell. And, he would have to call Chadwick, or Thompson, or both. Beatty not yet. Tomorrow would be good enough. Today, Thomas thought, today, Milo safe and well in his bed, being cared for, would be for him alone. And, spying a face at the door, large, blue eyes examining his adoptive father's movements for signs of assent, Ernest looked on. No, Thomas corrected himself, as he drew a second chair up to his bed, Milo now fast asleep within it. Not just him alone. Them, alone. Ernest, he said to his adoptive son, when broth had been brought and Milo had supped on a few spoonfuls, before going back to sleep again. How was Manchester? 88,888,888. Andy was a godsend. Thomas, who was determined to go back on duty as butler, dilemmaed now because of Milo's return, could not have asked for a better colleague, a better friend. The house continued as it should. All of the butlering duties were carried out between them, and when Thomas was not directing the household, he was beside Milo, holding her hand, speaking to her when she was awake. She seemed to know everything and did not seem to be ailing. But when Thomas dropped a tray of tea things 2 days after her return, it was Daisy who made him sit down. Have ye slept? Daisy asked him. Be honest with me, Thomas, she added. Ye can't carry on with no sleep. And Thomas could only agree. Milo seemed to be stronger, and Ernest had sat with her when Thomas was downstairs. She had had Master George and Lady Mary visit her, although several more people were queuing up to see her too, not least Chadwick, who could not make it until the end of th week, but was coming. I will get a few hours this afternoon, Thomas told her, mindfully identifying Ernest's bed for a few hours shut-eye. They had not introduced Ernest to her yet, that was another thing. That man called, who came here before, Daisy told him, and Thomas looked at her sharply. Come with me, Daisy, he told her. Leave that, he added. Flora can manage. They went to the servants' dining room, and Thomas sat wearily in a chair by the unlit fire. Which man? He asked her. Tall, thin, black hair? Daisy shook her head. Not Chadwick then. Small, thin, handlebar moustache. He was big, with fair hair. Did not leave a name. Said he had been in charge of sending Milo to Germany. Thomas drew back his chair in alarm. Lindman? Both Thompson and Chadwick had told him about Frederick Lindman. Blackmailed Milo because of him, sent her to Heisenberg because of her attachment to him. He had caused this, the scientist so favored by Churchill. Are you sure? Thomas managed. He didn't leave a name. Said he would be back, Daisy told him. Thomas, was Milo in Germany? Thomas felt himself sigh heavily, and put his hand to his forehead. But Daisy had not finished yet. Thomas, she began, but he sat forward in the chair, and looked at her beseechingly. Please Daisy, how long have we known one another? He looked to the ceiling, towards where Milo would be lying, Ernest, her son, beside her. Yes, he agreed. Yes. She was in Germany, but she is no traitor. She did not got to be with HB, or betray her country. She went there to. And here, Thomas was at a loss. He could not rightly say why Milo had been there. Was Lindman so influential that she was forced into it? Knowing Milo, yes, knowing Milo, she would have gone there for the science alone. She would have put herself at awesome risk to influence the outcome of the German army's interest in uranium. Had they succeeded in making a bomb, and it had been out of Milo's hands. Would she then have been a traitor? It had not happened, and how much of that was down to Milo was both important and not important. For her arrival back to Downton Abbey would not be inconspicuous. Chadwick would have to know, and whoever he answered to, presumably who George Paget answered to, would have to know. I will discuss it with his lordship, Thomas told Daisy. I'll be up in a few hours, he added, dragging the chair back and getting wearily to his feet. Not if I get word to Lindman first. You won't, thought Tom Branson, who had been listening to every word. 88,888,888. The rest of that night, Thomas would not move from Milo's side. She was lucid some of the time. Spoke about Ernest, her brother Ernest, as though he was there amongst them. But when Thomas made mention of a child, a son, Even when he assured her she should not worry about telling him anything, Milo shuffled round in bed and turned her head away from him. At nearly midnight, Daisy pushed door open to see if Thomas wanted anything. Thomas shook his head, and Daisy nodded, and then froze, watching the skeletal form of Milo Ashby in his bed. How could that be the woman she remembered Milo to be? In all the world, how could that ragged human being be the girl Daisy had known, obsessed with apple pips, able to mend anything, able to sit for hours saying nothing as her mind entertained her, or as light or color filled her mind with wonder? As Daisy closed the door, Milo turned back to him. Through dry, cracked lips she spoke to her husband, trying to shift herself up in bed and failing, pathetically. "Thomas, forgive me, I ran away with the love of my heart." "Mr. Heisenberg?" Thomas asked, for it was no time to be coy. Milo reached for his hand. "Physics," Milo told him. The joyful game, fleeting and free, of the atom and its form." And she trailed off, coughing her dried throat. "Ernest. I miss him." "I miss him too," Thomas replied, knowing she meant her brother, and he could not prevent tears running down his face. Then Daisy pushed the door open again, and she possessed the chair opposite Thomas, and held her other hand. As Milo went back to sleep, her hand going limp in Daisy's, the two long-time colleagues cried, laughed and remembered the little scamp who fell into the fountain, and up the stairs, and bit them, and sneaked around, and eventually, when Thomas had closed his own eyes, still holding Milo's hand, Daisy left, and returned with a blanket. It was curious, then, that the door which she thought had been locked by Andy from the outside, the key pushed under the gap so that Daisy could let herself out and lock it behind herself, was off the latch. Daisy closed it behind her, locking the door, and took the key with her. Tom Branson watched Downton's cook in the darkness of the yard, cursing his ill luck at now being locked out.